I'm getting ready to do some upgrades to my computer down here in my workshop. There's actually two computers down here, and even though this is the older one of the two, this is the one that I use to do almost everything. It's also the last machine that's in my house that's still running Windows XP. And I've got some new hardware to put into this case, as well as some other parts that came out of other computers that were upgraded, which will give me enough parts to have a complete set. And then the stuff that comes out of this is going to get put into my workshop home theater PC that runs that TV over there. I had a video about that somewhat recently. I used a bunch of old HP parts to build that. The HP hardware is actually going to go back into its original case, which was the DX2450. Since that case has a Windows Vista business license on it, I'm going to take that machine to work and use it there. So basically going to be upgrading two of my machines and one machine at work by putting new stuff in this one here. Just kind of shuffle the parts down the line. But anyway, I've got everything's already backed up onto my file server, so I think I'm good to unhook this thing and put it on the workbench. Here's a closer look at some of the hardware that's going to be used in this upgrade. The only two things I bought new were the motherboard and processor. This is kind of a mid-range motherboard, not too cheap and not too overkill for a workshop computer, just in that happy medium. And I've got a AMD FX 6300 CPU. It's a 6-core black edition, which I believe it means it's unlocked and it can be overclocked. Whether or not I'm going to do that, I haven't decided. I have 4 gigs of G-Skill Eco DDR3. It's a little slow, only rated for 1333. This came out of my dad's computer when I upgraded it. I may end up overclocking this to 1600 or something if I can. Sometime down the road I'm going to put some much faster memory in this system, but for now this will do. I've got the 120 gig Patriot Wildfire SSD. This came out of my daily use computer upstairs. I had actually upgraded it to a Samsung 840 Pro SSD when I put Windows 8.1 on it. The GeForce GTS 450 also came out of my dad's computer, and it's the same card that I showed in my Shuttle XPC video recently. The SATA cables, not for this build, just something I picked up for the same order from Newegg. And I've got the Logitech G400S. I originally bought this to replace my old MX518 that I use on my daily use computer, but even though this is the direct successor, I ended up liking the feel of the MX518 a little bit better than this. And also, this has a much cheaper wire on it than the MX518 does, so I just ended up taking the new one down here. But anyway, let's get on to this build. I'm really starting to run short of time here. It's actually a work night, so I've got to be quick. I remember this computer now. It seems like it was just yesterday I built the doggone thing. It's a Gigabyte G41M ES2L motherboard. It's got an aftermarket mass cool CPU cooler and 2 gigs of cheap RAM that I bought aftermarket copper heat sinks and put on there so I could overclock it. Have a 400 watt Silverstone Strider power supply. I'm going to be changing that out to a newer version of the same model actually. I have a old Western Digital WD1600YS 160 gig SATA drive. It's actually the exact same model that I just put in the Shuttle XPC that I had just uploaded a video about prior to this. I think I bought a pair of these years ago and was using them in my daily use computer. I remember when 160 gigs was enormous. Of course, then again, I remember when I was excited to have a 43 megabyte hard drive in one of my first computers. But anyway, now I'm just remembering how old I'm getting. Up in the top there is a crappy DVD SATA drive. The door keeps getting stuck closed on it, but I'm going to leave it in there for now because I don't feel like messing with it. There's an Asus GeForce GT240 video card. In my M-Audio Delta 44 sound card that I use for generating all my audio for my workbench and stuff. And there's a card reader in the front here that actually came out of another one of those HP DX2450s, and I think I have a couple more of these. Somebody suggested that I put one in that Shuttle XPC, and I just very well may do that, because it does come in handy. I was in the process of moving the standoffs around to accommodate the new motherboard, which is a lot larger, and luckily there was just enough standoffs to reach every mounting point. I was afraid I was going to have to dig through the parts drawer and find some of the same style standoffs so I could have them all in there, but got lucky on that. But I noticed something on this case. It has these 4 holes here in the CPU area, and if I remember right, that was for the early version of the Pentium 4 that depended on the case for the CPU retention bracket or something. And if that's what that is, then this thing must be pretty darn old, because I don't know if they even put those in the newer cases. If any of you guys remember when that was introduced and phased out, definitely comment in the video. I don't know anything about this case. I'd like to know what the make and model is, but there's no tags on this thing anywhere. It's just a generic case. And I've seen this design used on lots of cases. But this one, being a bit older, has a little bit heavier gauge metal, so still a pretty usable case. But I think we're all ready for the new motherboard, so I'm going to get this thing unboxed and have a look at it. This motherboard looks pretty cool. It reminds me a lot of the 990 FXA UD3 that I have in my computer upstairs. Same color scheme and form factor and all. This is a revision 1.0 board, which that kind of concerns me. I don't know if they have a later version of this out already or not. Hopefully there haven't been any major bug fixes or anything on this, but I don't think it'd be an issue for a workshop computer. I'm not doing anything too crazy with this. 4 RAM slots is kind of nice, but usually you don't use them all anyway, because if I remember right, the limitation of the CPU is that it can't run the memory at full speed if you're using more than two modules anyways. But I like full-size ATX boards. They have a little more future-proof stuff on them, more fan headers and things like that. Basically more connectors. And they also gave you 4 SATA cables with it, which is handy. I'm only going to need 2 of them for this install, but one thing I can't stand is when I go to upgrade it in the future and I don't have any more cables that match the motherboard. So that won't happen with this one. I'm going to get the CPU and memory installed and then put it in the case, because I think it makes it a little bit easier to do it that way. Well, I'm ready to power this thing up. I've got to tie up some cables still, but I wanted to test it before I got too carried away with the cosmetic stuff. The power supply that I thought was the same model as the other one actually ended up being a 560 watt, so I guess that ended up being a bonus. I thought it was only another 400 watt. And I don't know if the old AC97 audio connector from the front panel is going to work with this board or not, but that's about the least of my worries right now. Let's see if this thing's going to run. Oh, I suppose it helped to turn the main AC power on in the back. Alright. Oh, so far so good. Yeah, it's stuck in a reboot loop. Darn. Oh, there it goes. It must have been adjusting to the RAM or something. Yeah, memory frequency 1339. Okay, I was worried there for a second. I thought there was a problem, but I guess not. Alright. What did I want to... Boy, I'm not used to this BIOS at all. I need to turn on the HCI, which it already is. Port 405 type IDE. I'll just leave that for now. Since I'm using the SSD, I do need the AHCI to be on. I wanted to make sure that was set before I tried going into Windows. As far as the other stuff, like overclocking, I will do that. I will attempt that a little bit later. Right now, I'm anxious to see if this thing is going to load Windows off this drive without any changes. Alright. Man, I cannot talk tonight. I'm just too tired. I'm hoping, you know, even this being a different type of video card, I hope it's going to actually get into Windows here. I really don't want to go through all the trouble of doing a full reinstall, since I'm going to be using Windows 7 on this machine anyways. Sweet, it looks like it's going to work. That'll make it much easier. Just turn it on and go. Holy crap, that screen resolution's low. It's because I'm using, so my computer upstairs had an AMD video card in it, so it's going to have to install the GeForce card now. I'll come back in a second when this thing's caught up. Well, all I had to do was install the video driver for this different video card, and everything's working now. It's really weird seeing my icons and stuff on this tiny monitor, because the one upstairs is a 30-inch, and these icons hardly take up any room on the desktop upstairs. It's also kind of weird seeing my Windows 7 setup again, because I was kind of getting used to the Windows 8.1, and this feels almost nostalgic in a way. Here's Memtest 86 Plus running at the stock memory speed. I don't know how accurate the throughput reading is on here, but it says about 4 gigabytes per second right now. So I'm going to go into the BIOS and try to change the speed to 1600 and see if this thing will actually run. I'm curious how far I can push this stuff. If it ends up toasting the RAM, no huge loss, because I want to put 8 gigs of DDR3 1866 in here anyway. Alright. Advanced frequency settings. Memory multiplier. Let's just try to bump that up to 1600. And leave everything else default and see if this thing will actually boot. I may have to go in and manually tweak the settings on the RAM. Yeah, it looks like it's at least going to post. Try to boot from my USB stick here. Yeah, it looks like it didn't actually take the settings, so I'm going to go in the BIOS and look around some more. It's kind of interesting though, this new version of Memtest 86 has a lot more information and a lot more capability than the prior version I had. It's a freaking sweet program, I love it. Well, that's interesting. The BIOS is reading the RAM as being at 1600 megahertz, so I don't know what gives there. Memtest is just reporting what it finds on the SPD on the RAM, I think. Kind of odd. That's crazy. I'm in the process of copying the data off the old mechanical drive. Since I had it right here, I figured I would do it that way instead of going over the network, but I think this old mechanical drive is actually slower than what it would have been if I would have transferred it off the file server over the network, because I can usually get, you know, 30 to 60 megabytes a second off that. So this must be a really slow hard drive. That's more like it. Copying that same folder off of the file server onto the computer this time, and it's holding around 60 megs a second. So I don't know what the deal was with that that other hard drive, but sheesh. Also, I noticed, minimize everything here, the gamma curve on this monitor is quite a bit different from my one upstairs. This one's it has a lot higher black level, it looks like. Of course, the camera doesn't really show that, but yeah, this is definitely doing a lot better than having that old hard drive hooked up through the SATA port. Kind of ironic, isn't it? Because my file server is completely IDE based, and it's blowing that thing out of the water. Something must have been wrong, because that's just weird. Ooh, hit 80. Not bad at all. And that file server can really scream for how old it is, I tell you what. That thing ain't no joke. Now I've got some files that are already there. Overwrite. Anyway, let me take care of the rest of this transfer and get this thing finished. Got the sound card all working. Yep, works good. Now, I think I can start working on putting this old hardware into the home theater PC. I gotta decide whether I want to split that up into a separate video or not. Really, there's no reason to even make a video because you guys have seen that computer work already. But I'll think of something. I can definitely tell this video card's not very powerful. It's only getting about 15 frames per second in this Unigine Valley benchmark. And I think that's just 2x anti-aliasing here. And 1920 by 1200 resolution. I'll have to try this on my computer upstairs and do a direct comparison and see what it gets one of these days. Still not doing too bad. It looks good, and you know, despite this monitor being made in 2007 and having a ton of hours on it, it's still got a lot of life left in the backlights. I'd say this is going to be a real nice computer for workshop use, much better than what I was using before. As pointless as they may be, I know some of you like to see the Windows performance scores, and this is what I ended up getting, the graphics card being the weak point. For some strange reason, the hard drive got a 7.8, and my system upstairs it got a 7.9, and the RAM got a 7.9 in here, which really surprises me. This is DDR1333 overclocked to 1600, and it's maxing out the performance score. Overall, I think this thing's all set, and so far it's running perfectly. And it sure is odd having it be almost completely silent after being used to that noisy mechanical hard drive and the louder power supply fan and everything that was in there before. So I think this is going to be sweet. I'm still getting used to this mouse after having that simple Microsoft mouse hooked up to this for so long, but this feels more like my computer upstairs, so I'll should have a better time with that. Plus I think it tracks on this bench a lot better than the other one did. But anyway, I'm going to decide what to do next, whether or not to make another video segment or not. I think I'm going to go ahead and just make this a separate video, because I think I had enough footage in here and I don't want to make anything too long. But speaking of this monitor, I found another one on eBay for a price I could not refuse, so I'll have another repair video of that Acer AL2416W, and that one has something different wrong with it, so it ought to be an interesting project. I decided that while I had that other motherboard sitting there, that I would take the RAM and put it in this little shuttle computer that supposedly only supported 2 gigs, just to see what would happen. And surprisingly, it detected 3.5 gigs. That's kind of odd, really, because I don't know why it would be limited to that. It must be a BIOS limitation of some sort, because I'm all but certain that the chipset on the board should support 4 gigs. It's a 64-bit machine. Very strange. Alright, I just discovered something fairly amusing from this computer as I was getting ready to head back upstairs. Check out the weird noise it makes when you shut it down. Weird, man. But yeah, I'm too easily amused. And while we're on the subject of weird shutdown noises, this old amplifier, you might remember from an earlier video, the BGW amp, has a discharge noise that it makes. And it's out. Anyway, hope there was enough information on this computer. I know there probably wasn't a whole lot of interesting things to talk about with that simple build, but make a video about it anyways, right?